It's a me, Arshen Gaia. I know. You're probably wondering what the hell's wrong with me, and why I'm ruminating about a game like this. Let me start with a couple of prefaces, okay? First, if you like 3D platformers, go buy this game. I'm dead serious. This is an awesome game, and it deserves to be enjoyed. It's on the DS. It's going to be available on the Wii U soon for Virtual Console. You can play it on a 3DS. Go buy the game. Okay, got that out of the way. Second thing. There's kind of been a policy change here at Arshin Guy's Ruminations, and that's because, well, a subject that I'll be talking about more at length later, but it has to do with time, okay? Not having too much time to do things that aren't related to, the show, basically. So, just about any game I play, or have played recently, or I'm planning to play, is being done for the show. Now, don't mistake me, I'm still enjoying the game, but my point is, if I wanted to go randomly pick up StarCraft 2 again, that's not for the show, if you follow me. There's nothing else I can do with that. I've already done a full lore run. I've already done, all that stuff. I don't know what else to say on that. So I wouldn't do that because I couldn't use that time productively for the show. I mean, so I had actually, before this policy change went into effect, when I was laid up, sickness, surgery, it's all that fun stuff. There were 3 games I played through to pass the time and to get myself distracted and all that fun stuff. Final Fantasy IV Heroes of Light, which I already punched out a video on. Another game which actually shall remain quiet about, and Super Mario 64 DS. Now, this rumination is going to be a little bit odd because, as weird as this is going to sound, I don't have too much to say about the game itself. But before you think I'm just trying to shell out and get a game video in here, before I get back to other videos, I do actually have something I really want to talk about, and something really important to me, and I feel like this is as good as time as any to do it, especially with regards to this game, one of the 3 kings, which we'll talk about what that means in a moment. So I'm going to go ahead and start way back here, okay? Bear with me. I'm going to kind of seem a little rambly here, but I am going somewhere with this, I swear. There we go, pinky swear. I don't know why I was doing this. This is the out-of-character thing. Let's go ahead and start with some basic definitions. Now, I've talked about definitions before, but those of you who have caught my stream already know what I'm going to be saying, but I know a lot of you don't really catch my stream or can't catch my stream, so I'm just going to assume you haven't seen any of this. We've got a port, okay? Which is when you just take a game and plop it over into another game. Generally, you don't change anything. It is literally just a game on a new system. Sometimes it can be an HD port, where they actually polish up the graphics extensively, which it can be either a port or, in the next category, we'll talk about them later. Or sometimes it's a hardly different port, where they polish up the graphics and you can barely tell the difference. Anyways. So that's a port. And then we have a remake. A remake is when they take a game and actually change something about it and edit it. And generally to make it better is the idea, obviously. So then they have a branch off of remakes. This is called a reimagining. The best example I could give of a reimagining is actually Battlestar Galactica. For all intents and purposes, it does fit the definition of a remake, as does the other thing I'll use as an example in a second, but it's different enough it deserves its own category, because the idea is to basically take the same theme, or the same principles, or the same concepts as the original, but to do something new with it, rather than actually taking the original and just, polishing and improving upon the original. You see where I'm going with this? The other thing I'm going to use as an example, and I know this is going to cause some hassle, because I know this is a very divisive topic, but I'm just going to say it. The other thing I believe deserves to be called a reimagining is the new XCOM. Not the shooter one that's crap. I'm talking about XCOM. And the reason I say it like that is I actually can't remember which one is which, because I know there's like XCOM this, and there's XCOM that, and there's XCOM this. The one that's actually XCOM, the one that I actually love, is the one I'm talking about. And I know a lot of people are going to be upset with that because I know a lot of people think it's a crap game or it spits on the face of the original. But in my opinion, it does deserve to be called both a remake and a reimagining of a remake. And to make this clear, all reimaginings are remakes, at least if they're done properly. But not all remakes are reimaginings. You see where I'm going with this? Final definition: proper remake. A proper remake is when you take an old game and remake it, but then you go the extra mile. You crank everything up to 11 and you improve it in every facet and aspect. Now, I'll be talking about that more in detail later, so I'm not going to cover that right now. For a long time, I have talked about my ire with ports. I usually use it as a derogatory term, in fact. In fact, the way I just said it right now, port, kind of gets that point across. The problem is I have seen so many bad ports. Dozens of them. In fact, I was I was a big on gaming, and I had steady income and all that stuff, so I could afford to be big on gaming when the PlayStation 1, the Dreamcast, and the Saturn were all out. If that doesn't mean anything to you, don't sweat it. But I know several of you are out there going, "Oh, yeah, okay." Simply the night. StarCraft. Anyways, so of course that was on the N64. Nevertheless, there have been some really bad ports, and in my professional opinion, the reason most ports that are bad, the reason that the ports are bad, is because they're done purely for the money's sake. Now, I know that sounds weird, especially given how much I've been trying to speak in defense of making money lately. But let's make this clear. There is a difference between doing something and getting paid for it, and doing something only to get paid for it. There is a huge difference there. Or if you're going to pull it technically on me, 99% or 98% or 90% getting paid for. If that is the primary motivator, is the money, no. I'm sorry. As someone pointed out on my stream recently, I don't do this solely for the money. Yes, I am trying to make money because I need money to exist. That is an unfortunate reality. But if that was my prime motivator, I would expect every single one of you to say, to flip me off and say, "Goodbye, Arsh," because you're just a hack at this point. Excuse me. The point I'm trying to make here is that a lot of ports were done purely for the money. And I can name several right off the top of my head, and I know it's going to sound like I'm picking on them because I'm going to be pulling them out again later. The Final Fantasy Chronicles Anthology, whatever it was, which had FF4, FF5, FF6, and Chrono Trigger, all ported to the PlayStation 1. Some of the most disgustingly terrible ports I've ever seen in my life. Before I get too upset about this, I do know that there are some people out there, actually a fairly large number of people, who basically can't enjoy these incredible games other than via this format, because this is the same thing that's on the PlayStation Network, and I know a lot of people who've picked up FF4, FF5, FF6, and Chrono Trigger on the PSN. And I know that to some people the difference between those and the actual games isn't significant enough to matter. And that's cool. Really, it is totally cool. I am totally okay with that, and I understand. And I wish I could go out, reach out to you, and be like, "Here, money, enjoy it properly." But you can't, and you don't, or I can't, excuse me, and you can't. There we go. Let's phrase this properly. And I understand, and no judgment is basically what I'm saying here. I kind of mention this because the next thing I want to bring up is Final Fantasy X. Yeah, I know. I like I said, I just keep picking on Square Enix, but bear with me, okay? Someone actually asked me recently, and if you're watching, you know who you are, about whether or not they should feel bad about picking up FF10 HD. Okay. Now, FF10 HD is done for the money. Let's just start with that. But let's also point out the fact that it is a hardly different. Those of you who haven't heard me use that phrase before, the terms HD, which in actual terms is supposed to mean high definition, is thrown around too much. It is thrown around as a buzzword, as a marketing, ploy to be like, "Oh, look, it's high definition," and in a lot of times it's used improperly. This is nothing new. Marketing has been using words improperly since forever. This version does technically qualify as an HD remake, but in every way that I think matters, it doesn't. HD port, excuse me. There's nothing about this game that's a remake. It's just a port. By the way, FF7 and FF8 on the PC, another good example of really bad ports. I hate to keep picking on them. There's other examples. There really are, I swear. But the bottom line here is that the question was, should they feel bad about picking up FF10 HD? I'm going to say this because this whole topic, the whole reason I'm really doing this video, is because this whole topic is actually very interesting to me and something I care about and something I am passionate about. I really want to share with you. So forgive me. I swear I'm going somewhere with all this. There is nothing wrong, fundamentally, with buying something like FF10 HD, and let me explain why. It's not about, you have the rights of the individual or whatever, although that is true, but that's not actually where I'm going with this. There is a good use, even for crap ports like that, because that is a crap port. I'm just going to say it. The FF10 HD port is a crap port. It should have been a remake. If they were going to do it at all, do it properly. But what they did do is ported it to a modern system, and that's reason number one to go ahead and pick up a port. There are people who don't have access to the older games, either because they're too expensive to get a hold of, or they're simply unfeasible to get a hold of, or they don't have access to the older systems. Now, granted, the PS2 isn't exactly that much of an older system, but it is a reasonable reason to go ahead and pick up a port, because you can get it on a modern system, or on a system you actually own, for that matter. There's another valid reason to get a port, and this is kind of a weird one, and this comes down to convenience, but it is still a valid reason in my opinion. I'm a gamer, okay? I know, shock. But as I look over on my desk right now, I have 1, 2, not counting the PC, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 consoles hooked up and ready to go at a moment's notice. Now, I'm okay with that, because that's just kind of the way I think and function. But I know a lot of people, in fact, I know 2 people personally, who specifically would go out of the way to get ports on a more modern system so they don't have to hook up their older games. So if they feel like playing God of War, just to use one example off the top of my head, they don't have to hook up their PS2. They can just plop it onto their PS3. If they feel like playing, well, that's a bad example. I was going to say Metroid Prime, but you can play that on the Wii. If they don't feel like hooking up their GameCube controller, I guess. But anyways, the point being, that is a valid reason to, if you don't want 7 consoles, or 5 or 6 or whatever, hooked up at once, you just want your more modern one, or even if we're going past, any concept of convenience, if you want to play a game and you feel in the mood for that game, you don't have to go digging out that console for that game and hook it up because it's on a modern system. Now, obviously, that doesn't apply to everything because not everything's ported, but you get where I'm going with this. There is one last reason that to be considered ports, except even crap ports, like the ones I've mentioned already. And that is getting people into these games that never had the chance to in the first place. I know several people, and I kind of already hinted at this, I know several people who never got to play FF4, FF5, FF6, Chrono Trigger, whatever, and who have played the PSN version. Now, I'm sorry, those are crap ports, but as a result of them being ported in such a manner, those people can now enjoy those games because they have access to them. And you kind of see where I'm going with this. I've said before that the FF6 version of the GBA version of FF6, which is a remake, not a proper remake, but a remake of the FF6, is phenomenal and is the definitive version as of this point in time of FF6. And I'd go so far to say that's not even my opinion, that's fact, but let's just go ahead and say it's my opinion to be safe. The problem is, well, it's getting harder and harder to get a hold of Game Boy Advance games, is the problem. And it's really hard to get a hold of SNES copies of the game. So what's that leave you? Well, there's the anthology, which is actually also kind of starting to go up in price, but then there's the one with PSN. It's $10. Bam. You see where I'm going with this? Even though I rail against ports, it is ultimately because, number one, I feel like most ports are done for the wrong reasons, which does bother me. I'm sorry, it just does. And number two, most ports have no reason for me. And again, that's just me. That's my opinion. You see where I'm going with this? In fact, I actually can't think of any ports I've actually picked up, other than the terrible ones back, when in the era I just mentioned. Yeah, I actually can't think of any, because most of the time I don't have a purpose of it. Yeah, I've actually had someone ask me, am I going to be playing FF10 HD when I get to the marathon in a week here, week from tomorrow? And my response is obviously, no, of course not. I own FF10. Why would I buy it again? Because that's just the way I think, okay? But let's stop talking about ports, okay? Let's talk about remakes. Because really, when it comes down to it, the definition of a remake can be best defined in a series of categories, okay? Interface, gameplay, content, graphics, sound. You with me? Now, a remake is a game that has been... if we start with the concept of porting it, because it's almost always on another system or something like that, and then they take one or more of these facets and improve them. Let's use FF6 as a good example, okay? First of all, interface, totally unchanged, so that's off the list. Gameplay, not totally unchanged, off the list. Content, some additional content was added. They added the new espers, and... Actually, I'm sorry, there's actually a sixth thing. I apologize, there is actually a sixth thing. Sorry. So where the hell was I? Okay, so they did actually add additional content. They added the additional espers, which were fun. They added the Dragon's Den, which was actually a lot of fun, and that's kind of it. I mean, I know there's the arena, but the arena was kind of dumb. But there was additional content, so okay. Improved graphics? No. They didn't actually really do much with the graphics in FF6. They did actually change them. If you ever see FF6 SNES and FF6 GBA side by side, you'll see what I mean. It's kind of hard to explain, but they fiddled with it is the best way I could put that. Sound. Sound was made worse. Admittedly. That's actually a limitation of hardware in this case, but it is true. The sound quality of FF6 A is worse than FF6. So if you're looking at this list, you're like, well, no, yes, kind of, no, and worse. Why is this a remake? And this is what I was leading up to, point 6. Story. Now, I've also defined story as a 5-point thing, but let's leave that aside, because that's not really relevant for right now. What is relevant is that the story of FF6 was improved. Not by changing it, really. That's the funny thing. All they did was polish it. And that ultimately is what a remake is, a polish of the original, an improvement upon the original, of some level of significance. I use FF6 as the definitive example of this because FF6 is arguably the most minimum a game can be a remake and still be a remake, in my opinion. There's probably other better examples, but I like this example because really, ultimately, the only thing they really did was polished up the story. Now, story in this case refers to basically everything with that regards. You know, it was much better localized. All the dialogue was better. All the text on the screens and the abilities and the items and the weapons and equipment. All of that stuff was polished and refined and actually made better. And indeed, if I could use the word, proper. Now, FF6A is not a proper remake, obviously, because that is basically the one big change. But that is a big change, and it's big enough to qualify it as a remake and, you know, be a worthwhile purchase. I went out and bought that the day it came out, not just because it was FF6, but because the one thing they kept talking about was, well, they didn't say it this way, but that it was being localized properly. And those of you who are around in the days of the old RPGs, especially the old games in general from Japan, know finding good localization from Japanese games used to be kind of a big deal. It's one of the reasons Earthbound kind of got a lot of noise back when it came out. That was one of the first games that was really properly localized over here. Weird, right? So that's a remake. Now, reimagining, like I said, XCOM. I could really just point to that and say, boom. I don't want to talk about that too much, but I do want to give certain credence to a reimagining, because the idea of a reimagining, a properly done one anyways, is, like I said, to take... It's something I like as a writer, a creative challenge. I've talked about this a few billion times. The idea of limiting yourself and trying to do something creative within those limits, really, is what that comes down to. Now, obviously, too much limit is too much, and too much freedom can also be too much. But you get this sweet point right here. It's like, okay, we want a game, it has to be about aliens, we have to have turn-based strategic combat, tactical combat, excuse me. We have to have some base-building aspects, you know, that kind of thing. In my opinion, they really took the essence of XCOM and made it into, you know, a reimagined new game, XCOM, whatever the subtitle is. So, cool, awesome, that's great. It's also the category of this list that you will see the least of. It is very rare to see a game that is reimagined, extremely rare. It is even more rare to see a game that is reimagined correctly. Syndicate. Cough, garbage. I'm sorry, but it's true, because so often you'll see a game that is reimagined, but isn't. And that's kind of my point, is that by my definition, Syndicate is not a reimagining. It's not even a port. It's not on this list at all. It's a crap game that has an old label in order to get the attention of the original. I could point to another game that came out recently that's just like that. It's called Dungeon Keeper on the frickin' phone or mobile or what on the mobile. We'll just start calling it that. It's my new policy. Bam, Q snapped. That's not in anything. That doesn't even belong in this entire genre of categorization. That is a crap game or a worse game, depending on how you want to just define it, depending on how kind you want to be, that has a label. And that's it. That's not on this list, so let's just leave that aside. So a true reimagining, pretty rare. Let's go to this final category and finally bring it in to Mario. Proper remake. Now, a lot of you have heard me use this term before, and I usually try to be very specific about its usage. Because, remember those six? Remember those 6 things that can be updated? A proper remake does virtually all of these. There's no hard set number. I haven't sat down and said 3 of the 6 things must be changed for a proper remake. But any game I'm pointing to that is a proper remake generally has all 6 or 5 or so, which actually leads me to something I'll get to in a moment. But let's talk about Mario 64 specifically. Go down the list. Yui, vastly improved. Now, this is kind of a fun thing. If you're playing... Oh, shoot, I actually meant to grab this before this. Hang on. This won't take long. Seriously, it's right here. Because my N64 is one of those 7 consoles I just mentioned that's hooked up right now. Bamf! Okay. Whoop, it's kind of caught on the PS3 cord. I have a couple controllers down here. Okay. N64 controller, right? Got this thing. Got this thing. You have to hold it like this. It's kind of weird. I'm not a huge opponent of the N64 controller like I know a lot of people are. But the long and the short of it is, playing this versus playing the DS version, the DS version is, in my opinion, superior. You have more refined control over the camera. You have more refined control over yourself. The movements are more precise. There's less frame drops. Just in general, the control of the game is being improved. Now, I mention this because this is very different from gameplay changes, which we'll talk about in a moment. Now, just to verify that this wasn't just me, I went ahead and asked a few of the speedrunning people I know who run Mario 64, who have chosen to remain anonymous for this, who, if they have speedrun the DS version, and every single one of them said yes. Now, this is kind of cool in its own right, because the vast majority of them, all but one actually, said that they preferred the controls of the DS version. Now, it's also worth noting, while I'm on the subject, it's not just better controls, you have more options. There are 3 modes to play 64DS. One is like, normal, right? One is normal plus stylus. And one is like pretty much just stylus, which is actually really wild to play as, let me tell you. But my point is, the options are there. And I am always in favor of options in a video game. Literally always. I cannot think of a circumstance where I'm not in favor of there being options in a video game, unless you come up with something ludicrous and contrived. So, yes, definite awesomeness there. But even if you're just using the default controls, the general consensus was that the controls were superior to the N64 version. And the reason they don't race the DS version is twofold, primarily. There were a few other reasons given, but there were 2 big ones that were repeated. One, streaming or recording or whatever a DS game is something that's harder to do than it is an N64 game. That's just the truth. I in fact do not have fundamental capacity to hook up my DS to my computer. I don't have a capture card for that, so I understand that completely. And the end, that's really the example of it. But the second reason is actually really cool because the tricks are different. Now, this may sound weird, but even though it's the same fundamental game underneath, the way it works is so different that so many of the tricks just either don't work at all, because they've either been fixed, or the engine has been changed too much, or they work differently. And if you have spent forever, and I know a lot of you understand what I mean by this, so forgive me for this, trying to explain this, but it's like trying to ride, you've gotten very used to a very specific bicycle. Its height, its lean, how much pressure you have to put on the pedals, how good the brakes are, that kind of thing. You've gotten very used to this bike, and you're very, very good at this bike, and you know this bike inside out. Now you have to race on that bike. Now it's still a bicycle, but you see where I'm going with this. Everything's different, and so you can't do those same tricks and performances that you could normally because you just don't know this new bike nearly as well. You follow me? I know it's a weird example, but bear with me. So I just felt like pointing out that I am not alone in thinking that the controls and the general UI, in other words, is vastly improved. It's also worth noting that they added to the UI. In other words, you have this little map thing going on with the down with the bottom screen, and there's a few additional options that they added in. I'm not going to go over all of them. It's all awesome. Second point, gameplay. What is the difference between UE and a gameplay? Mario 64 is probably one of the best games to exemplify this difference, because in some genres, like an RPG, it kind of gets iffy between the two. The difference in gameplay in Mario 64 can best be described by the fact that there's more. Now let me explain this. In Mario 64, the original, you play Mario, you run around, dun 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 dun, you get caps, the caps give you powers, it's great, and you win the game. Okay. Now, if you get 120 stars, you get the Super Triple Jump. Mario 64 DS, you have different characters you can play as. Each one of them plays differently. Significantly differently in several cases. The gameplay style between them is so different. It was actually weird because I was playing as Yoshi for a huge portion of the game. More on that in a bit. And I was so used to Yoshi that when I finally rescued Mario, I was like, yeah, Mario! I played him for one stage and then I threw him back into the roster. And I was like, okay, give me Yoshi back. But then when I got Luigi, and not to say this, but Luigi is usually the kind of character I prefer to play in games like this. You know, Mario 3D World, Super Mario Bros. 2, that kind of thing. I always prefer Luigi, so I was like, okay, Luigi. And then I played Luigi for most of the rest of the entire game. It was awesome. But my point is they fundamentally are different. The way, not just in their stats, because their stats are different. They move at different speeds. They jump at different heights. There's a third stat, I can't remember what it is, but the point being, they actually have different stats, but then they also function differently. The way Yoshi's arc jumps, kind of like with the flutter thing, is completely different than Luigi's slow climb and ascent thing, and Mario's just plain old thing, and Wario's hop. You get where I'm going with this. The gameplay is fundamentally improved, different, better in every way. Then, still on gameplay, then they decided to go ahead and just abstract, well, we've already completely added these new characters. Let's go ahead and add a few additional power-ups you can play as, or play with. And the way it works is great, because in the original, there was the fly cap, the vanish cap, the metal cap. I think that was it, actually. And you had to unlock those via stages. In this one, there is the fly cap for Mario, and there's the metal cap for Wario, and there's the vanish cap for Luigi. You can probably already tell what I'm going with here. But several of the others have different abilities completely regardless of this. The ability to balloon up. Oh god, there was another really weird power-up. The balloon power-up is probably the weirdest one. That's from Mario. But my point is they added new power-ups. They changed the existing power-ups. It adds a whole nother layer of gameplay to several stages. It's awesome. Gameplay. So far, UE, vastly improved and changed. Gameplay, vastly improved and changed. What's next on the list? Graphics, I think. This is in no order of importance, by the way. I'm just kind of going as I remember them. I don't remember the order I said it, so we'll just go ahead and go with graphics. I don't feel like I need to say anything on this topic, but seriously, I have actually heard someone, I can't believe this, because this happened with Zelda Ocarina of Time as well. Same exact comment, saying the graphics are the same. To which I just was kind of like, you got to be kidding me. You've got to be kidding me. As I said before, when Zelda Ocarina of Time came out, I actually pulled up Ocarina of Time on my N64. I was there with Gary, and had the 3DS right here, and we just started watching the opening cutscene, and it was so different, we were just blown away. Same basic thing with Mario 64 or DS. Now obviously not as much because DS game versus 3DS game, but if you look at Mario 64 compared side by side with Mario 64 DS, you cannot tell me that's the same graphics. Everything is improved. Everything is polished. There's actually new graphics because they had to handle some of the new stuff. We'll leave that a little bit more for the next thing because I just remember what actually was point 3. But my point is the graphics have been improved in every way. And this is really important in its own strangeness to me. Let me explain why. I have often said that some games age better than others. I know I'm getting into some controversial material here, but let me just say this is just my opinion. In my opinion, Fallout 1 has not aged well. Phenomenal game. Incredible. Loved the hell out of it. Can't go back and play it. Baldur's Gate 2, another good example of this. Just can't. There's too many obstacles in the way. One of the things this happens in is graphics. Some games graphically age better than others. In general, there's no hard and set rule, but in general, if you aim for an aesthetic rather than whatever the current best graphics are available, generally it's going to come out looking better. Another pretty good example of this is the original Metal Gear Solid, not the remake. Or, I'm sorry, not... Yeah, I think I could go and call it a remake. Not the remake, but the original PlayStation 1 Metal Gear Solid. that game has not aged well. Mario 64, the original, did not age well. Zelda Ocarina of Time did not age well. You get where I'm going with this. And in fact, there's another one I really want to pull. Crash Bandicoot, the original, really didn't age well. But and actually, you could point to a lot of games at the beginning of the 3D era and say they didn't age well, especially graphically. And it's pretty obvious why. I'm not really holding them against the games, but what I am saying is that I actually don't really like going back and replaying Mario 64 because of the controls and because of the graphics. When I'm going to replay at some point in the future, when I actually have spare time, Mario 64 DS, because it was awesome. They fixed the UI, they added all the other things I'm talking about, but they fixed the graphics. They don't bug me. Those graphics will age well, I guarantee you. That's all I'm saying on that one. This is all just my opinion, of course, and I don't want to try and shove it down your throat, but in my opinion, they went for a much better aesthetic with the DS version. Let's go and move on to sound. One of the weird things about sound in this game is that it wasn't changed as much as you'd think, but it was changed. Most of the music was resequenced, and for those of you who don't know what I mean by that, imagine basically rebuilding the song on a different chipset, different engine. That's basically what it comes down to. It is, for all intents and purposes, the same song. It's just, and I do mean, in like a port sense of the word, if we were to use that term. But it's being done by a better audio engine, so it sounds better. On top of that, they left pretty much all the sound effects identical. They actually pulled the sound files from the original C4 and put them into here, and that was done on purpose. And that's also something that we'll get into when we get to point 6. Actually, which I'm going to move ahead to point 5. I know I'm going out of order, but I'm doing this order for a reason, despite what I said earlier. But the sound is probably the least changed thing about 64DS. But it is changed. It has been refined. That still counts, only barely. And I only mention that for something that will be important later. That's really all I have to say about that. Next up, content. This is point 5 now. Content is where Mario 64 DS truly shines. If they had just polished that game, did an FF6 kind of thing, improved the UI, improved the graphics, bam, done, that would have been a great game and I still would have bought it. But no, they went the extra mile with this one, because they went way out of their way to add tons and tons and tons of additional new content. I don't even know where to start with this, to be completely honest with you, because if I just sat down and made a list, it would be a pretty long list. Every stage has another star. Let's just start with that. A lot of the stars in stages were actually changed to either be specific to a character or to make them more difficult, or in some cases to make them easier. The TikTok clock is a good example of where they actually made it easier, believe it or not. And like I said, they added new stars to each level. So there's an addition. It's, for all intents and purposes, another way to play that level, for lack of a better way to put that. And then they went ahead and added the additional levels where you go ahead and where you free the other characters, which are whole new levels on their own right, with their own stars. That also have their own little mini bosses or bosses. I guess those are just bosses that have their own thing. Yeah, I don't even know where to begin. And then there's the fact that they actually added the multiplayer aspect, which wasn't what it was originally supposed to be, most unfortunately. And I weep because this would have been so awesome. This probably sounds familiar, and I'll kind of make the point here in just a moment. Sorry, I actually meant to have this ready. This probably sounds a little bit familiar. But the original intent for Mario 64 DS was to have 4-player co-op as you're going through the stages. And, I don't know, the idea of having a 3D Mario 4-player co-op thing going on at the same time sounds really awesome, and is definitely a game I would really enjoy. Buy this game. But, seriously for a moment. Even ignoring that they did add a multiplayer combat concept, which is actually a lot of fun. Played it with my sis, and then they added the mini games. Now, this is kind of a weird one, because I'm really picky. I'll just say it that way. I'm really picky about mini games, about whether I'll enjoy them, about whether I'll I'll scratch my nose, about whether I'll care enough to try them. Right. So for me, mini games generally have to fulfill one or two of two different qualifiers. One, they have to be fun. I know, right? 2, they have to be rewarding. Now, I did Chocobo Hot and Cold in FF9. I hate to bash that for the 50th time, but I did it because it was rewarding, not because it was fun. We'll see what I think about it in about a week here, or whenever I get to FF9. I did the mini games in 64, and let me make this clear: there is no reward to doing those at all, none. It's just there to play for fun, but they were fun to me. Not huge fun. I would liken them. I've used this term before. Let's go back into our definition thing. Flash game. The idea of a game that is fun and I enjoyed it and it was great, and then I put it down and I never look at it again because it was a flash game. And the term actually came up because of the whole flash game phenomenon that was really big for a while there, when the internet was still kind of pushing that whole thing before it moved on to mobile gaming. But it also kind of applies because it's just it's good, but then it's gone. Nevertheless, I do have to give them credit for all of the things they added, including the minigames, because they are actually fun, and I had a lot of fun. The best way I could liken them is if you like the Mario Party games, that's basically where they're at. And from my understanding, they're actually designed by the same team, or at least consulted. So all of this, we have all 5 points so far. One of them's kind of an iffy one, but then we have point 6, and I wanted to save this for last because you know I couldn't talk about a video game without talking about its story. It's not in my nature. Story is just too integral to my experience, to my caring, to something I want in my games, right? I mean, how many games have I played without a story? Mario Kart, all of them. I think that's actually it. And some of you are out there, well, what about the Civilizations? No, I make a story for those. What about SimCity? Yeah, same thing. What about The Sims? Same thing times like 3. Because there's like 3 stories I do for The Sims. 3 types of stories. But the Mario Karts, there's no story at all. I think that's it. This is the really funny thing. Because they didn't need to do this. This is really leading into my big point. I'll really cover this in a moment. And why it is I say, please go buy this game, because it's so awesome. If you like 3D platformers. They didn't have to do anything for the story in this game. The original story was... I could summarize the story if I was to just be blunt. Bowser, princess, go save her. That's the story. If I wanted to be verbose, I could talk about how the castle has contained the power of the stars, which has been emboldened within them, and Peach has been entrusted to guard them. I could talk about how the paintings within the castle have been brought to life and been made into basically pocket dimensions by Bowser using the power of the stars, although it's actually arguable that Peach did that first, and the paintings were always pocket dimensions, but whatever. And Bowser empowered certain of his minions to go into these painting worlds, into these pocket dimensions, in order to claim them for his own as basically reward. It's like parceling out land if you're a noble lord. And okay, you've done but served me well, here is some land, that kind of a thing. And then he gave his stars out. Some of them got loose. Some of them were captured by a rabbit. I hate that rabbit. I don't hate the rabbits nearly as much in 64DS. Yes, by the way, rabbits, plural. There's a lot of them. And you want to get all of them, trust me. Anyways, so I could keep going about that, but they took that storyline and they said, let's add to that. This is so cool. Mario 64 starts with a letter from Princess. Mario's like, yeah! And goes, and then Bowser, and then, okay, we won. Stars somewhere in the middle there. Probably some coins, too. Mario 64 DS starts with a letter from Bowser. Now, I know some of you who've played this game are looking at me weirdly. But the letter at the beginning from Peach, actually from Bowser in the series, and it is typically sent to the heroes to trap them. Because it happens. The game starts just like before. Mario pops out, and 2 more pop up, and Luigi and Wario pop, and they kind of each other for a little. No dialogue. The Super Metroid version of storytelling. And they're all jumping around each other, and then they run into the castle. Now, so far, up to this point, when I very first picked up this game, my first thought was, okay, cool, because I knew about the additional play. I mean, it's on the cover, for God's sakes. So I knew about the additional characters, so I'm like, okay, cool. But then the camera kind of lingered there, and then it showed Yoshi up on top, and I'm like, okay. And then there's a fade out, and I'm just waiting to get to the gameplay, but then it keeps going. See, what happened is those 3 were lured in by the note from Bowser, and then Yoshi was just sleeping outside, and Lakitu comes by and says, hey, they haven't come back yet. Could you go save them? And so Yoshi, this is so awesome. Yoshi's actually the protagonist of Mario 64 DS. Really, when you come down to it, because he is the primary. He's not only is he, in my opinion, the best or tied for the best character of the four options, but he's the guy you started. He's the one who goes in and saves Mario and Luigi and Wario, although those are optional, in order to in order to progress the game. Now, it's worth noting you actually have to save Mario because you have to do the Bowser levels as Mario. He literally won't let you in unless you're Mario. However, you can choose to completely ignore saving Luigi and Wario. I don't know why you do that, you horrible, horrible person. But so the game is played as as Yoshi, as frickin' Yoshi, and so you go in and you have to. And the first thing you got to do is you got to find a key out in the castle guards in order to get in at all. And my first thought is just, wow. I know these are such tiny changes, but my point in all of this is the changes they made to the storyline, the additional dialogue, the fact that some of the dialogue was copy pasted from the original, and I do mean copy pasted, letter for letter in the localization. That may not mean as much as it should to you because it's actually harder to do that than it sounds. Try to keep in mind there's the original Japanese and then they ported to the original English, and then there's the new Japanese, which is thing, and then they have to port to the new English. It has to get from here to over here, which is, it only happens if you're trying, is what I'm trying to say. Forgive me for segueing for just a moment, but I'm going to point to an example of the exact opposite. Final Fantasy IV. Every version of Final Fantasy IV has a completely different localization in English. Completely different. And, well, okay, admittedly the GBA one and the PS1 one are actually pretty simple, but that's my point. The localization team couldn't just copy-paste. Well, they could have, but they would have had to put effort and time into it. And so what they did was they just relocalized it each time, and the dialogue ends up being different in every single version, including in the two Japanese versions, I just feel like pointing out. So seeing the dialogue being completely different, completely identical, is actually kind of phenomenal in its own right. And they specifically did it because of that sort of charm of the hokey dialogue. I don't have a better way to put it. And then all the new dialogue is done in that exact same style of that ho ho ho, your mustache is pathetic. All that stuff. It was awesome. And then, and then of course the end there's the tiny little edit thing. But my point in all of this, forgive me, is that they tried. They put forth effort. This game was made, in my blunt opinion, the way games should be made, with passion, with caring, with a degree of enthusiasm for what you're doing. This game was made to be a great game, and to make money, and to, keep their jobs and keep their families fed and all that stuff. But they cared, and it shows. And it's awesome. And I guess I don't actually have anything else to say about the game. I mean, I really don't. I'm sorry. There's so little to actually ruminate about this game. But I want to end on one final. There's one last thing I want to talk about, and that is a new definition. A new word I'm going to start using. It's called a true remake. Okay? We already said port, remake, reimagining, proper remake. Now, as I said, a proper remake is they do more than one of these things. Okay? FF6A is a remake. Chrono Trigger on the DS is a proper remake because they rebuilt the engine underneath. That's probably UE if I was to categorize it. It could be gameplay, but it doesn't matter. Right? One or the other. They added new content. They added new story, and they polished the localizations. 4 of the 6. Bamf, right there. All right, I'm with it. But a true remake is a remake that has done all 6. That has improved in every single aspect and category of the game. And there are not many games that qualify as this, but as I was playing Mario 64 DS, I really realized that this truly was like something past a proper remake, and that's why I really felt the need to add this new term to my terminology and to my usage, because it is a true remake. Everything is improved. I'm going to use 2 other examples of this really quick here. One is the one that I've used a billion times, Final Fantasy IV DS. Every single facet of FF4, the DS version, was improved in all 6 categories, and it was awesome. And that's really all I have to say about that. There's actually been quite a few proper remakes done here or there, but I'm sorry, true remakes. But I actually am having trouble thinking of the other one right off the top of my head. Give me just a moment here, as the Jeopardy theme plays in my head. I give up. I don't want to do an edit in this. I'm sorry, I can't think of another example. Maybe I'll put it in the comments if I remember it later. But the point is, we're going to start using this new term because certain games just deserve that extra level of recognition for trying. And I just want to, I want to point out one last thing while I'm here. A lot of people accuse me of being a Nintendo fanboy. I'm not. Sorry. Nintendo makes tons of mistakes and always has. But I tend to defend Nintendo basically for one of the same reasons, two of the same reasons that I tend to defend Blizzard. Because I still like their games. Not all of them, but some of them. And because I feel like they get too much flack. I hear so much negativity towards them that it just kind of rubs me the wrong way, and I'm automatically disinclined. I know that's a personal problem, I'll admit it. But one of the things I like about this situation is Final Fantasy IV DS, which is the game I really wanted to use as an example anyways. You could point at it and say, aha, there is still some measure of Square left in Square Enix. No, because that was actually made by a third-party developer. I just remembered it. Dragon Quest. The Dragon Quests. Dragon Quest 4, 5, and 6. Those are true remakes. Debatably. Actually, I could see an argument for those just being proper remakes. But the reason that reminded me is those were also done by a third-party developer. So no, Square Enix didn't do this. All they said was, yes, you can make a game for us, and then... But you might wonder what this has to do with Mario 64 DS, because Mario 64 DS was made by Nintendo. See where I'm going with this? And I just feel like pointing out that it takes something to go back to one of your own games and say, let's make this better. And that sounds like a weird statement. It has to do with a degree of, not pride per se, but kind of a mixture of pride and shame. The admittance of, well, my game wasn't great and it could deserve to be improved. Being willing to admit fault or failure or lackluster or whatever in yourself is actually harder to do than it sounds, especially doing so publicly and so blatantly, especially in the kind of culture that exists over there. It's not quite as big of a deal over here in the States. I don't know how it is in Europe, sorry, or Australia. I know I have a lot of viewers there too. Or Canada, which I also have a lot of viewers in. Majority of my female viewers are in Canada. Just fun factoid. But it takes something to go ahead and say, this game sucks. Yeah, okay, go do something with this while we're working on FF1325 here. I'm sorry. And it takes something more to say, we could do better. We could do better. Let's do it. Let's go back to board and really make this and improve it in every way. And so I have to give Nintendo props, because for every boneheaded, dumb, stupid decision they make, and there have been lots, there's almost always has been a complete opposite of that, where they do something incredible. It just makes me go, yes, yes, let me buy this. Please let me buy this. I'm begging you, please. And I just wanted to get that out there because it's something that kind of matters to me, and I really want to give them credits for it. So, that's actually what I have all to say. I'm sorry for the unusual rumination. It's kind of more rumination about the idea of a proper remix, but nevertheless, I hope you enjoyed. And I'll see you soon.